No, what's wrong today?
So, I was involved in a shooting today.
Oh.
A film shooting!
Hey,
When I look out my window, many sights to see. When I look in my window, so many different people to be, that it's strange, so strange. You got to pick up every stitch. You got to pick up every stitch. You got to pick up every stitch. Must be the season of the witch. Must be the season of the witch. Oh, must be the season of the witch.
yeah.
Oh. Your face was incredible, though.
I'm empathetic for people, and I was really worried for a second. But here you toy with my emotions.
He's empathetic, you guys! Mock him! Empathy is apparently deserving of mockery nowadays, isn't it? Pretty much, yes. Well, okay then.
True. So, what film shooting were you in, Madhog? What film shooting were you in?
It was a massacre. Everybody had dumps on guns, and we riddled the film with bullets. Everybody died. It was such a terrible... No! Terrible jokes aside. I am not quite sure what kind of film we were shooting for, or shooting at. We were shooting at it in the sense that we were all pretty displeased with it, so we said our peace of mind about it. You know, in wrestling terms, shooting means going off the script. Keep adding to the joke, it has multiple layers, apparently. Alright, so it was a synchronized dance scene, and apparently also the last scene of said film, a short film, by the way. It is more often than not tradition to shoot the last scene of the film first. Mostly because this one required a bunch of extras to fill the scene. Because, again, it was all synchronized dancing, and I was part of it. I did not do it for money, I did it as a favor to somebody. In fairness, it was a really easy dance to remember. All we needed to do was a bit of this, and a bit of this.
I thought you were doing the Macarena for a second.
I can do the Macarena, but no, it was not the Macarena. Unfortunately, I have memorized it. In spite of the strict structure of the synchronized dancing, because, again, everybody has to be synchronized, there were portions of it in which we could improvise. You have missed out on the opportunity of seeing me performing my amazing belly dancing and whatnot.
Well, why don't you show it to the audience now? Put it online for everyone to see.
Well, I would, but YouTube would probably demonetize this video instantly. It's too raunchy, mate. Besides, I am still tired from today, so I have little to no energy whatsoever, but I wanted to power through and do this podcast because it will most likely be the last we do for a while. Isn't it right?
Yeah, unfortunately I'll be heading off to Arizona in like 2 weeks or so. Yeah, but then by the time I get back, maybe Nero will come on for some of these podcasts and all that, so it'll be a bonus. There'll be 3 heads talking on here. Yeah.
It's going to be a nightmarish hellscape for me to handle, but sure, why not? It cannot get possibly worse than when we had Devar on board, and he took the podcast hostage for 40 minutes that I had to cut down significantly, as he tried to ramble his way into explaining why this one game he did not like.
Yeah. Well, at least in this sort of case, like, it'll be me and Nero, like, right beside each other, so there won't be as bad of a thing where one of us rambles on and on forever and ever. Like, that will be just, like, a clear thing, because I can just poke him to, like, stop talking.
Yes, you poke him in the belly, you poke him in the belly button, and you deactivate him.
Exactly. Yeah, but yeah, let's see about making this one the best podcast ever. Until the next one.
It's off to a great start. I will not even bother to tell you how many cuts I must have already done by this point. Which is weird for me to say now, because we are recording this right now, but it will be far more cruel to future me, because future me is going to be the one editing, and time and space, it has no meaning, yada yada yada. Right, all of that nonsense aside. So, last week, as some of you might remember, I had heavily foreshadowed that I was going to watch the latest film by Wes Anderson, Isle of Dogs.
And what did you think of his latest outing?
I didn't like it.
Ooh.
I honestly was very disappointed by it for a whole slew and variety of reasons that require so many explanations that might as well be the entire podcast at this rate. But first, before I get down and dirty to my thoughts about Isle of Dogs, which, by the way, I think it's one of his weaker films, again, for many reasons, I would like to hear the opinion of a novice. Yes, what did you think of Isle of Dogs?
Well, the only one that I can really just sort of remember, because I've really only seen his animated library of it, which is basically just Fantastic Mr. Fox and this movie.
And these really are the only 2 animated films he's ever done.
Yeah. Just remembering back on Fantastic Mr. Fox, I really remembered it for its very dry sense of direction. Like, most of the characters didn't really go very high in octave, and its animation styling and stop motion was very unique for it. Unlike a lot of other ones like Laika and such, which has a lot of more like vibrant, free-flowing animation, it was a lot more stiff. And like you said, there's a lot more symmetrical staging of everything, which made all the movement really cool. So that's what I really liked about Fantastic Mr. Fox, and that animation styling made its way into Isle of Dogs. It's definitely a very stylistic movie in a sense. I can see why this didn't go directly into general audience territory. It just didn't feel like something that would be easily digestible in a sense. It felt very slow, even more so than Wes Anderson's last movie, which definitely made it more boring. Because I watched this with my boyfriend, and he was falling asleep during it.
Well, first of all, you are both uncultured swines for saying that, but regardless, I really like...
Thanks for that.
Okay, insulting you aside, honestly, the humor is the least of the film's problems, and I'm coming into this, again, with my own perspective, which is the perspective of somebody who has always sort of being fascinated by Wes Anderson's style, both his emphasis on the artifice of cinema and the alienation aspect of it, and the more or less subtle commentary on human nature, is definitely much better with live action than stop-motion animation because, well, he has more experience with that. But that's a problem in its own right. While I think that stop-motion lends itself relatively well for its own unique style, which, again, it's all about putting a giant spotlight on the fake nature of the medium, of the digests, which, with those very uncanny characters models and miniaturized settings, said style feels empowered. However, I have to say this, and I cannot believe I, of all people, am saying this. His style is much better for live action. Well, actually, no, that's not true. What I meant to say is that his style is far, far more impressive and powerful with live action rather than animation, because yes, everything about Isle of Dogs and Fantastic Mr. Fox is meticulously put together, meticulously detailed and animated. Even the very stilted movement and the motion and overall nature of the characters and how they interact with the environment. It works really well with a style that's, by the very definition of its own nature, supposed to be stilted in some way or the other. If you see a film by the Aardman Studios, they seem to be actively going against the limits of the medium of stop-motion animation to be as fluid and animated as possible, whereas with Wes Anderson is embracing the limits of the medium to comment on the limits of the medium. Which is fine in its own right, but again, this is all far more impressive and far more interesting with the live action. And I am saying this merely and purely from an audience standpoint. Because it's one thing to see puppets on screen acting and moving like puppets, and then seeing actual human beings, human actors on screen in big fake sets, acting and moving like puppets.
Correct.
It is far more interesting and impressive, and it is far more powerful with whatever message of alienation and metatextual analysis that Wes Anderson is going for with each and every one of his very heavily stylized films. Stylized, in fact, to the point of porpoise self-parody. Cinéma d'auteur, if you will. I'm bringing back that pretentious term to give you an idea. So I enjoy his films because they are both a proper film d'auteur, but at the same time they are making fun of the entire tradition of authorianism. And they're all great in that sense. Unfortunately, again, that doesn't work quite as well with stop motion, because again, you are seeing fake entities that you know are fake, acting like they are fake. Whereas with the human actors in his live-action films, you are seeing real people acting like they are puppets, fake puppets. So when they actually escape from the stiltedness to deliver a moment of emotional sincerity, that feels 10 times more strong and powerful. Whereas in the cartoon, in the stop-motion animated cartoon like Isle of Dogs, as good as those characters are and as sincere as they get towards the end, their appearance and their not being real people works against them slightly. So this is one of the few cases in which live action is better than animation when it concerns a very specific style, in my opinion.
In my sort of case, like the way that I took the emotional aspect of the movie is that with the dry style of Wes Anderson's like animated films from Fantastic Mr. Fox and this one, definitely the dryness of the dialogue is just sort of like straight throughout both films. But definitely in Isle of Dogs, that sort of worked more against it because it's such a much more bigger story with like multi-classism, like the Isle of Dogs and all that sort of stuff. And you basically go towards the ending where they have like these big moments with the son and father having to come together all, and it just becomes sort of a movie where it's trying to have a heart to it, but it doesn't really beat deep down. I know that sounds overly pretentious to put it like that, but
you have a point there, because honestly that third act had a bit too much meat on the grill, so to speak. And it was rushing towards a conclusion when it had a lot of threads dangling to reach, so to speak. So it didn't quite feel as emotionally satisfying as a more typical Wes Anderson film would tend to be, in its own unique and understated way. I really appreciate, by the way, the understated acting in this film. One of the many reasons I like to compare him to Jean Renoir is that Jean Renoir used to have his actors trying to act as if they were reading the phone book, to try and rid them of whatever they might have learned in acting school, and trying to get out the sincerity of the performance in order to be as authentic as possible. And Wes Anderson, in my opinion, succeeds in doing just that once again. He knocks it out of the park, in fact. My favorite scene in that film was that first interaction between Chief and the show dog.
Yeah.
Which pains me because it doesn't really amount to anything significant within the rest of the film. They just meet each other again in the epilogue and they are suddenly together, and it doesn't really have any substance to it, sadly.
Yeah, that's sort of what really just sort of annoyed me about the film, because it has all these like really nice things. Like the one thing that's just sort of almost pissed me off in a sense, like the girl character and the boy character. Well, at the end, the boy character has a crush on the girl character that got just tacked on in there.
Yes, I am deeply unsatisfied by the way Anderson handles the characters in this film for the most part. Because if this were to be just about the dogs in the aisle and wouldn't cut away to the humans every once in a while to drive whatever larger plot forward, this would have been a much more focused and much more enjoyable film. Instead, we had to cut out again to the humans in the mainland and see whatever they're doing, and we are only allowed to connect with one of them because of this particular choice that the director made, which I'm going to address in a minute. But it's a big problem, and so there is that. I want to
compare it to Fantastic Mr. Fox real quick, because that's a much more focused story on like Mr. Fox and his way to basically get over on the farmers and such. Like, it's a much more focused tale. While here we have the dogs with the humans on the aisle, and they're basically both stories just sort of clashing together, basically get one over on top of the other. And just like you said, it just leads to the points where just like, oh, the boy likes the girl now. We didn't set that up.
I guess that happened.
Oh, yeah, the chief and the show dog, they're together now. Oh, you know, that dog that we're looking for, like he's got a wife now, and they have puppies now.
They are venerated as gods because Japan and his wacky shrines and his wacky traditions. I'm going to get to that right now because it's a big problem with this film. Right. So you might have heard that people had systematically called out Wes Anderson for his, shall we say, less than amiable portrayal of Japanese culture in the film, which I understand the intent behind it. but still, in the execution, it looks like he's ridiculing a other culture, as it were.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it comes across as that.
But here's the deal. Here's the bigger problem, which comes with the burden of my own perspective towards this director. Because if you happen to be a casual viewer that doesn't know anything about Anderson's previous works and happen across this film, you might just feel a bit taken aback by seeing a character that literally looks like Yellow Kid, for example, or seeing all those really awkward sets and situations that are clearly meant to portray Japanese culture in a somewhat comical but also alienating manner that you are clearly not supposed to connect with as a Western, non-Japanese speaking member of the audience. But again, if you if you know this director and you know his other films, then it makes it much, much worse. And I'm going to explain this to you because I mentioned earlier about alienation, right? Is a way in which he portrays humanity in a overly stilted, fake and alienating manner to comment about human condition or human society, and to create a disconnect between certain situations in the film and the audience, letting the audience actually connect far better with very specific characters that the director wants us to emotionally connect with, which is all well and good in theory, but it becomes a problem when he is using a culture that's not his own for that purpose. He's essentially throwing Japanese culture and its tradition under the alienation bus, so to speak, for the sake of doing the same thing he's been doing with all of his films. We are clearly supposed to connect with the English-speaking characters, mainly the dogs, and that one useless girl from Cincinnati, Ohio in the mainland. But at the same time, we are not allowed to connect with any of the Japanese-speaking characters because there are no subtitles, because it's a stylistic choice that the director wanted to push in this. But it's actually detrimental to our immersion in the film, and worse yet, it's actually detrimental to the plot progression, because there are many scenes in which we are clearly supposed to follow whatever these characters are saying, but we can't because we don't speak Japanese, unless we do, clearly. But that's not the case for most of the people for which this film was intended towards. And again, it wouldn't be that much of a problem if the film was more focused in telling just the story of the dogs and the boy on the Isle of Dogs. But again, it keeps cutting away from that focus to move a larger plot in the background. And that's where it really doesn't work, this choice. Especially since the only character that we are allowed, again, to connect with is not a Japanese character, is this white girl that happened to be a foreign exchange student. We are only allowed to connect with her and not with any of the other more potentially interesting characters that are speaking Japanese. This boggles the mind.
Like, if you compare both sections of the movie, the one with the humans on the mainland and on the Dog Isle, like, you have the Japanese boy, and he's saying everything in Japanese and no one can really understand him, but you can clearly see his emotion and how he just basically moves and acts, and you see, like, yeah, I totally get what he's saying and all that. Yes. But then on the mainland, everyone's speaking like it's all expositional dialogue that you can't understand.
I think it's clear that we are supposed to find comical the fact that they are speaking a language that's not our own. Because, ha 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 ha, don't they sound funny with how emphatic each and every one of their words are?
Like,
Again!
I found it funny when the boy was doing it, because he was just a hyperactive little boy. I didn't find any humor on the mainland and all that when all the other Japanese characters were talking.
Well, you know,
Like,
there
it
was
only
this
since,
creepy Japanese lurch kind of butler character, and it's pretty obvious that when he's speaking, we are supposed to find it amusing because, oh, he seems angry, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Yes, this film has a lot of problems, most of which come from misguided decisions and even more misguided executions.
Animation-wise, it's a beautiful movie altogether. Like, the only parts that I really liked were on the Isle of Dogs. Everything else just sort of, like, glosses over, in a sense.
Yes, the film pretty much loses me every time it cuts to whatever the humans are doing, and again, this is the kind of film that needed to have much more focus and needed to have a much simpler story in order to work. But Wes Anderson tried to go basically outside of his comfort zone and tell a much more ambitious story than he usually does. His stories are usually much more small in scale, and that, again, allows for the characters in said stories to have a much more intimate connection with the audience. That's not distracted by whatever madness is going on somewhere else that you don't care about.
Yeah, like, if you really think about it, on the Isle of Dogs, what do we know? Do we know really anything about the other 4 dogs that are along with Chief?
That's a good point. Well, we all know that they are played by really talented actors and they're all funny in their own way. But really the only dog that gets any real development is Chief. And his relationship with the boy eventually gets really cute. It's basically the emotional core of the film. And then the boy becomes the mayor at the end because...
And get the kid government. Yeah, that whole society won't break down after like a week.
Let us not speak about governments ever again. So yes, Isle of Dogs. If you're not already an appreciator, a connoisseur of Wes Anderson, you might find it problematic. If you happen already to be a connoisseur and a fan of Wes Anderson, you might find it very problematic. There is no escaping from these problems that it has.
Yeah, unfortunately so.
But let's look at the positives instead. We've had 2, not 1, 2 stop-motion animated films released in theaters in basically a month.
Yeah.
That's almost completely unheard of.
Yeah, really. And Isle of Dogs did fairly well, if I am remembering correctly.
Well, Wes Anderson has always done pretty well for himself. After all, he keeps making films. So there is that. There is definitely an audience for his dry, alienating humor.
So we just have to hope for the future where he goes back to a much more focused, simpler story along with his work.
Wes Anderson is not the kind of director you should be binge-watching, because after a while all of his films seem to be too similar to each other. You could say he is obsessed with a very specific stylistic direction. In that sense, Isle of Dogs tried to be a little bit more ambitious than usual, but it did not work out for the best, mainly for all the reasons we've already explained. But, you know, seeing one of his films once every couple of years is still an experience. Now he really needs to do something about this trend of his. Specifically, how he tends to portray minorities or different cultures, because I think he might have the best intentions, at least in what he wants to tell, but he needs to be wary about what he chooses as a tool for his own sets of values and commentary and whatnot. Just a little bit more careful next time. Maybe this might have been a lot better if instead of accidentally mocking the culture of an entire country, he would have gone and created a completely different country out of the blue with a made-up language. Also, no more characters that look like Yellow Kid. There was this Acker character, the one that basically single-handedly saves the day, the one you saw 3 times at best in the entire film, and he looked like the most stereotypical yellow face imaginable. Yeesh.
Yeah, that is... I remember him now. Yeah, that was very awkward to see. And I was just
awkward,
thinking,
indeed.
just like, why are we focusing on this character just sort of pointless?
Because he's a Deus Ex Machina, that's why.
Yeah, because the boy can't save the day on his own, the dogs can't save the day on their own, you just need some other kid to do it.
In conclusion, I like Wes Anderson's postmodern fairy tales. Do better next time, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Change of topics. Change of gear. I hope you have something.
I would like to ask you, because this is like the latest thing online right now.
Oh no, oh no,
Thundercats
no, 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 no. I had to literally mute the words Thundercats and CalArts on my Twitter in order to get some peace from the discourse.
Yeah, I'm so sick of that. Like, I see it every single time I put on Twitter nowadays.
You know, judging from what you see on your Twitter dash, you would think on your timeline, as it were, people are legitimately more outraged about a change of bloody art style for a reboot of a children's cartoon than the shooting in Santa Fe. I have no words for this. I mean, why am I even surprised? Okay, I'm going to keep it short and simple for everyone to understand. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. It's not even a matter of people expressing concern or legitimate criticism or that they personally don't enjoy the new art style of this cartoon. And, you know, there could be an argument, if you want, to be made that we've seen too many cartoons in that style already. What I like to refer to as the Neo Rubber Hose, because it basically takes inspiration from the Rubber Hose style from the early 1930s, which I personally adore, but that's just me. However, this isn't a matter of being critical or even having concerns about, you know, Cartoon Network's recent track records with reboots, which has been abysmal, in fairness. But this is really just a bunch of entitled men-children coming out of their basement, yelling at their computer screen, "You are ruining my childhood, Cartoon Network, and now I'm going to send death threats to each and every one of these animators because they are clearly untalented frauds and nobody really knows how to draw a character, and I am so sick and tired of this idiocy.
Oh god, I love those sort of stupid comments like that. You don't know how to draw the character.
Everything about this is
just sort of connects back to that meme where it's like you've heard of that sort of meme where it's just basically like a picture of like Dipper's face from Gravity Falls, Steven Universe, Star Butterfly, and Gumball from Amazing World Gumball.
That
right? With all of them the
post,
same
I know
face,
that post.
Like, they're all the same.
That post was made as a joke, by the way, which people don't get.
Yeah.
Art. The trends in art are called trends for a reason. And that applies to cartoons as well. Remember Cartoon Network in the early days, in the late 1990s, where every cartoon looked like Dexter's Laboratory, the Gandhi Tartakovsky style, if you will. And what about the mid to late 2000s, where every cartoon, the few that the network was making at the time, looked like the miraculous misadventures of Flapjack. You know, then Adventure Time came around, and then Steven Universe came around, which were similar but also very distinguishable. And then OKKO came around, which is the most distinguishable of them all, honestly. And then there is this new Thundercats Roar, which by the looks of it seems to be very similar to OKKO in style, but it's still somewhat distinguishable.
Yeah, that was exactly like the thought that I had when I first saw it. Just like, just looks a lot like OKKO in a sense. And just from like the animation of the intro that I saw, just like, if it can have that sort of movement and such in its action in the actual show, then I'd be fine with that. There's nothing wrong with a comedy show with action in it.
Cartoon Network is pretty good at this, if OKKO is any indication. And there are really talented, hard-working animators at it. If you don't like an art style, does not mean that the people working at it are not doing their job. You entitled twats.
Yes,
okay, listen.
Calm down.
This has me so riled up. And I think the reason for it is that my timeline has been invaded by this bile and misguided hatred and entitlement more than any other major artistic crisis of the last few years.
Crisis.
You know, when, remember all that huffing and puffing over the Ghostbusters remake a couple of years ago?
No. God.
I did not come across to as much bile and hatred towards those examples more than Thundercats Roar. Thundercats Roar has just been like a virus. I literally had to mute Thundercats and the word CalArts. Oh god. Yes, CalArts! Yes, CalArts is the style. It's not a place where people go to learn to animate. No. It's a style, and apparently all the CalArts style is about characters with beanie heads and a rubbery smile, and you people know absolutely nothing. You know nothing of nothing. You're just entitled men children. Grow the hell up. If you don't like the art style, fine. That's fair. You don't have to. It's your opinion. If you don't like the idea of too many reboots, fine. Again, it's your opinion. You are entitled to that. If you start to send death threats to the people working on these shows because they are quote-unquote ruining your childhood, you need to grow the hell up. You stupid jerkwads. I'm done.
Like, just say my piece on it. Like, you can't ruin your childhood. Like, even if these animators wanted to ruin your childhood, by my calculations, Thundercats still exists. The 2011 version of it and the original cartoon of it. They both still exist.
Yes, speaking of which, who cares about Thundercats? You know, I can understand the outcry for Powerpuff Girls, or,
yeah,
you know...
that was a much bigger thing, but yeah, Thundercats...
Who cares about Thundercats?
Yeah, I haven't heard much about Thundercats in years. No one cares about Thundercats 2011.
Let me put this into perspective. The original 1980s show was just bad. Even by the 80s standards, it could not hold a candle to the likes of Transformers, which is saying something. It had one redeeming feature, and that's the outstanding animated opening credits sequence, which might be one of the best of all time in that regard, and definitely what inspired the current generation of animators working on this latest reboot to do what they are doing. And also the plot of Thundercats was just idiotic. And because of that, it lends itself far better for comedy and action comedy. So the fact that they are using a much more cartoony, keyword cartoon style for it, makes all the sense in the world. And you know what? It's not your Thundercats. Fair enough. The current DuckTales is not my DuckTales either. I understand, I recognize, I acknowledge that, and I move on with my life, because I'm an adult sometimes. Not always, but sometimes.
Yeah, it's just a new type of DuckTales. It's a new type of Thundercats that you can enjoy for even a different reason.
I might actually even like it once it comes out.
Yeah, I'm actually sort of looking forward to it. Like, the only thing that just sort of like turned me off of the Thundercats Roar intro was just a at the very end. That made you go like, oh god, no, I don't like that noise in my ears.
It's a really well animated intro, I have to say, but I wished it could have been longer, you know, to match a little better with the original impossible to compare opening, which again, it's fantastic. One thing that's disappointing about the seeming masterpiece that the 2011 show was that it had a really disappointing opening, or rather it did not have a real opening whatsoever. It was just the title Thundercats, and that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I remember the 2011 show. It was taking itself way too serious at points. It didn't really draw me into its world.
Okay, I mean, after the original Thundercats, it could only go up from there. So they tried to have a more serious story for this show. They tried to balance out moments of levity with moments of thoughtfulness. They basically tried to turn it into Avatar. And I think that was the biggest mistake. You know, people complain about the new Thundercats Roar looking too much like every other cartoon on Cartoon Network. They are similar because, you know, it's normal to have trends, but they are distinguishable. You could seemingly present a specific picture, a specific frame from any of these shows to some random people, and they will be able to distinguish them as something different from one another. You know, if they have eyes that work. But, you know, that's a pet peeve. The 2011 show perhaps was trying too hard to look and feel like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it did not click for me, specifically. I think overall it was mediocre at best, but people had latched onto it so hard because, well, for the same reason people had latched on really hard to, say, Sonic the Hedgehog in the early 90s, the cartoon from the Saturday morning, Sonic's at AM. Right. They have latched onto it because it never had a third season or a proper conclusion, and they are still sore because of that. They have not moved on. The mere idea that there is a new Thundercats Roar show and it does not continue the show that they care about, it is apparently something that entitles them into sending death threats to the animators, because that's what adult people do.
Yeah, it's just basically their idea, just like this assault in their wounds sort of thing. Just like, oh, they're not making making my thing, well, then just screw them then. Death threats.
The world does not revolve around you. These shows are being made for new audiences, and therefore they are informed by what is popular today when it comes to animation trends.
Yeah, because
guess what? What was popular? What was popular at the time when you were a kid is not really popular anymore. And once again, I go back to my original statement, grow the hell up!
Yeah, like think of it just from the business perspective. How well did a 2011 show actually do? Why do you think it only lasted the one season?
2 seasons.
And why do you think... Yeah, two seasons. I thought it was only one, no.
No, I think it had 2 seasons, and it was about to have a third one, but for some reason they didn't get one, and I believe there is a controversy about it, because it was not cancelled in the traditional way. I believe it was renewed. I don't know much about the story, but the point is that it was a while ago by this point.
It basically ended off in just, with the numbers that it had at the time, doesn't really give confidence to the executives, just saying like, yeah, let's continue a show like that. That'll be where the successful business is.
And I'll be also honest with you, I am tired of seeing shows that ironically look like Avatar or Korra. I have outgrown that phase myself. There weren't many shows with that specific style, but the more I see that style, the more numb I become to it. I could not continue watching Voltron, the new Voltron, because it was Avatar in space. I could not care that much about Thundercats back in the day because it was Avatar with furries, essentially. Which is very, very unfair of me to say, because, again, it was a popular style that was being tried at the time, but there is a reason why it ultimately did not work out the way it was supposed to. And the reason why it didn't work out the way it was supposed to is because Avatar: The Last Airbender was too good for its own good, or rather for the good of its own specific style, its own specific visual style.
Right.
Because now, whenever you see other shows that have that particular character designs and settings and tones and storytelling, you cannot really separate them from something like Avatar, which was the golden bearer of that particular anime-inspired style. And it's not the same, at least not for me, it's not the same for the neo-rubber hose style that the shows on Cartoon Network seem to be big on, because they literally do not look exactly the same. There are small enough differences to make them distinguishable. Yes, they all tend to have the rubbery smile, like so. But, for example, if you see a character from Crag of the Creek, they have a very specific composition when it comes to their heads and body types compared to how they would look in OK-KO, which also looks very different in terms of how the characters are drawn, or the outlines and the color palette. It's different enough.
You're saying we should be fair to like the Legend of Korra, Avatar: Last Airbender type shows as well. There are aesthetic differences between each one of them as well that basically can give them each different flavors. But there is that sort of dryness to it that basically go after seeing like the same style over and over again. You can get tired of it, which I can understand why people don't like the Calhart style of these other shows.
It's not a style. Yeah. I want to clarify this because the people coming out of Calharts right now, they are going to be the next generation and they will bring their own different styles that they have developed on their own. In fact, the people you're seeing right now, most of them don't even come from Calharts.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, your Calhart style has a much wider range about it, and maybe you shouldn't just be so sort of stuck to the fact, just like, oh my god, it's this particular style. If it's this style, it's the worst.
You know who else was a Calhart style?
Who?
Gandhi Tartakovsky. graduated from CalArts. Craig McCracken graduated from CalArts. Lauren Faust, also CalArts, I believe. You know, basically all of the venerated animators from the golden age of Cartoon Network, they are former CalArts students.
Yeah.
Would you call what they do CalArts style? Would you call Season 5 of Samurai Jack CalArts style? I didn't think so.
Yeah. Just calm down.
Just
like, we don't
grow
know
up.
anything about Thundercats Roar at this time. And just
except that it has an opening.
Yeah. Except and just partial voiceover from Lionel. And that's the only thing we know about it. We don't know how well it's going to balance its action and comedy. We don't know if it's going to go like full comedy like Teen Titans go, or it's going to go like more action like OKKO. We just don't know yet. So having this vile towards it is completely unwarranted. There's no point to it at this point.
Well, WhyBoy, it's just history repeating itself at the end. It's the umpteenth cycle of entitled nerds who think every new reboot of their favorite childhood franchise is specifically targeting their own nostalgia, essentially. It's the same with every new Star Wars, it's the same with any new Star Trek, it's the same with any new everything. I could go on. You know what? This should not be worth your while. This should not be worth my while. I am above this. But this really had me riled up for some reason, and I made the mistake of trying to be the voice of reason, and I ended up blocking a whole lot of people instead. So that was a afternoon well spent in that sense. You know what? You should actually take the example that the actual animators from Thundercats Roar are already taking. They are ignoring them.
Yep.
Because they are just white noise at the end of it. They are not worth caring for. And look, it's one thing to have legitimate criticism over a product that you actually had the chance to test for yourself, which you haven't yet. And it's another thing altogether to do whatever it is that has been going on with the quote-unquote discourse. That is a waste of time, a waste of my time, your time, everyone's time, the animator's time, internet's time. I won't tell you to stop because you will not listen to anything anyone has to say that would be different from your terrible, misguided opinion. So I'm just going to say what I've been saying to you this entire time, and that is grow the hell up. 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 Grow the hell up.
Grow the hell up. Yay.
You know what? This was cathartic.
Yeah.
I
I'll just say
needed it.
just for my final thoughts, I'm actually looking forward to Thundercats Roar.
I
put that in your
don't
exact
particularly
order.
care, honestly, about Thundercats, but hey, why not? I'm actually far
there you
more
go.
anxious to see Asbin Hotel than the Thundercats Roar, because I never particularly cared about Thundercats, and I should not start to do so now. I do
is
care,
fair.
however, when animators are being essentially persecuted for their hard work and passion.
Yeah, they're just being mobbed by everybody.
They are not the men. The animators are not the men. They're just people, artists who work for a living. Not that you would know anything about it. Sure, you should hate on the new Powerpuff Girls and Teen Titans Go. I'm not telling you you should not dislike a children's cartoon. Although you should have some perspective in that regard, but
Yeah.
the people working on it are not evil.
Yeah, exactly. You blame the actual product of it. You don't have to just point at the animators and just like, they're evil, evil, evil.
The point is, the people making Thundercats Roar, they are fans of the original Thundercats. They've grown up with it, and they want to do justice by it. But at the same time, they also want to make it their own Thundercats.
So they're not going to remake 2011. They're not going to remake the 80s. They're doing something for this age. And this age is different from the old age.
Also,
learn to understand that.
And also, Rubber Hose is the greatest animation style in the world. Fight me! Okay, I said my piece. Well, I believe that was a podcast and a half.
I think it was. I think it was indeed.
Also, you had a lot more to say this time around. For a change.
I really wanted to talk about Thundercats Roar. I've been thinking about it for a few days. And actually, if we're going to get into the plug soon, I'm going to be talking about it more with Nero. So stay tuned for that.
Yes, click on the videos. Your hatred fuels my business.
But also, I also have my Cartoon Corner review of Jester Till coming. Actually, that's already out.
Yes, I've seen it. It's good. Gets my recommendation. Watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, see what the Pooh Jester's all about.
Yes, indeed. Right. Oh, also that review of yours, it's actually symptomatic of a bigger problem. You know, it doesn't really matter how much budget you pour into a project if the people working on it are not talented enough to handle the expensive CGI, then you will result in terrible work.
Exactly.
Now that is a terrible hack job that deserves to be called out. Meanwhile, there are actually talented people working on a show that you already had decided not to like, to hate in fact, because it looks different.
Oh,
For
God,
shame!
different.
Your cartoon racism knows no bounds.
Yeah, but the most expensive animated feature, though, that's completely fine. Look at that CGI. It looks like it's from PS1. That's perfect. Come on. Like, that money wasn't going to go to something good anyways.
This makes me think of all the times in which Japan tries to implement CGI into its anime, and it is not well implemented at all. The only exception is Land of the Lustrous, which is pretty much the only good-looking CGI anime I have ever come across.
I can't argue with that. I have not seen any anime CGI that's looked anywhere near as good.
It still has problems, occasionally, like a sudden drop of frame rate that makes it look like bad stop motion. But for the most part, they nailed the style perfectly. There are some action scenes that look like video games, and I mean that in the best possible way.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've come to the conclusion of this podcast. We started off low energy, we ended up burning it down, as it were. And oh my god, Rainbow Dash is in the frame. It has been in the frame this entire time. I only now noticed. Oh no! It's usually covered up in clothes. I am so embarrassed. I'm embarrassed because I've actually lost interest in that show a long time ago. Just because of that. The season premiere of season 8. Dear Lord, 8 seasons of this. It has degraded quite a lot. But that season premiere was pretty much the worst thing that this show has ever put out ever. It's disgraceful and legitimately harmful in many ways. Definitely deserving of all the criticism, especially since it's aimed at children. Now that's when you should be criticizing something. Okay, so I'm going to try my best to summarize to you the season premiere of Season 8 of MLP, Friendship is Magic, the best way I can. Have you ever seen the classic show, The Critic?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so there was this one episode in Season 2 in which they are trying to enroll Jay's girlfriend's daughter into a prestigious school, but no school would take her. Then Jay's boss, Duke, which is basically Ted Turner, a billionaire, tries to convince the dean, I believe it was the dean, of a certain prestigious school to have this child enrolled in. But the dean says no, and not only that, he also basically dares, out of jest, dares Duke to build his own school. To which Duke responds by actually making his own school. This was really funny because Duke is a billionaire, a rich guy, which means basically he obeys only his own rules. Because again, he's rich, so he can easily bypass any established school system as he wants to. And he can brag about it.
Right.
Now, this was done in jest, this was comedy, clearly meant to be funny, not to be taken seriously in the slightest.
Oh no, it made it actually like an actual dramatic thing, didn't they, in My Little Pony?
Oh yes.
God.
So essentially, Twilight Sparkle, the privileged princess of friendship, the one who has status and power, says, okay, screw you, school establishment, I'm going to basically make my own academy, and it's going to obey my own rules. Twilight is Duke and the dean, the aforementioned dean, in addition to being the symbol of the establishment that the rich, powerful, quote-unquote rebel is going against. The guy was also, in this episode, openly xenophobic and racist, and he does not face any consequence whatsoever for being openly xenophobic and racist, even though he does that in front of the people, the ponies, who are in power and are figures of authority! Publicly!
I'm so confused by this. I haven't really watched My Little Pony that much, but I know a lot of its story beats and all that. If I remember correctly, doesn't she already, like, teach a bunch of kids already? Why is she making her own school and such? I didn't think she was just so pompous, just say, like, I'm gonna build my own school. It's gonna be better than everyone else's. I thought she was a humble character.
Well, she was. She became worse over the years. The writing degraded and head writers changed over and over again, and the show ran out of steam because it's been 8 seasons plus the film that you saw.
Yeah,
so yes,
the film.
So that's the state of affairs. What was really great about MLP when it came out, there were no really other cartoons quite like it. Cartoons that would dare to challenge certain topics or tell certain stories or being good and well written and funny, because, you know, we were just coming out of a terrible rut that was the past first 10 years of the 21st century. But then many newer cartoons started to come out, and they were all much better than My Little Pony, and My Little Pony never really evolved from what it was at first. In fact, it became gradually worse after Season 4, which was the peak, in my and many people's opinion.
Right.
But anyway, yes, the fandom of My Little Pony, it's still today a perfect example of how not to act towards a cartoon.
Yeah.
In general. At least a vocal part of it, not all of them, but a huge segment of this or any other fandom tends to be the so-called vocal minority that basically shades a terrible light over everyone else there who are just there to enjoy themselves. Basically what I'm saying is that kids are the best, purest fans of something, and adults, they are kids who have forgotten to grow up, and they are just tendentially, generally, no good. The worst fans. And the new Thundercats Roar, coming back there one last time, is a proof of concept to that.
Yeah.
It's time for the final greetings, everybody, and the plugins. So, WhyBoy.
I'm WhyBoy. You can go to toongrin.com for me, because me and Nero are going to be best buds together for 2 months. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff, watch a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll be back on the podcast soon enough. So stay tuned for that.
Fair enough. I am Madhog Master, as you all know by this point, and you can follow me on the Twitter at Adriano Bordoni1. You can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/madhog, to see preview screenings of my videos, such as this podcast show. And you can shut up about Thundercats once and for all. Thank you. It's ironic for me to say that, I realize, because I could not shut up about it for an hour, but you get the idea! And thus we bid you goodbye for the next month or so. Yep. Bye.
Ta-ta.